tiratanga Kia mea te atau e pai ai ki runga ki te whenua Kia ri te ano ki tō te rangi Ho mai kia mātou ai anei E taro ma mātou mō te Nei rā murua o mātou hara Me mātou hoki e muru nei I o te hunga e hara ana ki a mātou Aua hoki mātou e kawea Kia whakawaia Engari whakaorangia Mātou I te kino No hoki te rangatiratanga Te kaha me te kororia
Now, I think we have Glenys opening us up in prayer. Just unmute yourself, Glenys. Glenys. Would anybody else like to open us up in prayer this morning? Just unmute yourself and go.
Hia mua kowi ia mātou e I hoa. He tonu ia mātou maha kato. Te kowi anō hoki hi waka kaha ia mātou kia vai kōwea e a kowi ia mātou maha kato. Hi ma te mata te ma hi ma mi mahi hi ma wa ka oti I mātou ia kōwea ki weti ai hoki mātou ki te onu tonu I te mea I ata wā tia Nai e kawe ko iu ka waiti hoki no mato ariki a menai.
Kia ora, Vicky. Ngā mihi, ngā mihi. Kia ora moto aroha kia mātou. Ka nuku nuku ka neke neke. Ka nuku nuku ka neke neke. Titiro ki ngā wai e hora nei me he pipi whararoa ki tua takoto te pai. Takoto te pai. Whiti, whiti, tā, 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 tā. Whiti, whiti, tā, 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 tā. He rā taua ki tua, takoto te pai, takoto te pai. And if we have a volunteer to do a mihi, please unmute yourself now.
E te whānau, nau mai, haere mai, ki tēnei kaupapa taha Māori, nau mai, haere mai, whakatau mai, no reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Kia ora, Julia. Kia ora, ngā mihi, ngā mihi. Christ is risen. Christ has risen indeed. Hallelujah. That was Te Ara Koropiko West Spraden School down in Aotearoa in Christchurch. That was their waiata for us today to celebrate that Christ has risen. Hallelujah. You're already familiar with the tune. There's the Māori words for you. Just want to pop in my disclaimer once more that I'm not a reo teacher and I'm not a translator of Te Reo either. And I can't boast any really flash distinguished academic qualifications to do this. Engari, but I offer you a passion and a joy to enable and encourage you to engage further with learning to use Te Reo in a safe and respectful environment, while seeking to build your confidence in doing so. We are helped, of course, by our beloved liturgies and He Karakia Mihinare or Aotearoa, our New Zealand prayer book. And we'll learn a bit about the translations in the coming weeks translators and some of the challenges that we had to include Te Reo in the prayer book. Just to recap, if I could, we've gone over some of the Eucharistic liturgies, Hakari Tapu. We've visited the page 476, Te Whakawhetai me Te Whakamoemiti, and we've covered some of those pages there. You've heard me chant in our last session 2 weeks ago, pages 478 to 479, which is He Waiata Whakamoemiti. And next week, we'll be exploring those translations. They're not literal to the English text on the right-hand side of the pages. It's not a literal translation. And next week, we'll start unpacking that, which is quite a lovely story. And we'll speak about those who were part of the translations, and there were many, and how they arrived at the translations of the Song of Praise, He Waiata Whakamoemiti. But if you're wanting to learn those chants that I did last week, of course, they're available on our Anglican website, anglican.org.nz, and just go to the Te Reo Māori worship resources. The whole of the 476 chanted is available there. Where I'd like to go, though, speaking of chants, is many of you would be familiar with He Tikanga Whakapono, or the affirmation of faith. That's on page 481 of the prayer book, and Māori chant it most times. Actually, no, all the time. I don't think I've ever heard them say it. It's always chanted, and I know many of you have already heard that chant. But I'd like to play it for you. It's sung by the Shiloh whānau, and whakarongo mai.
He tikanga whakapono, ko koe e te atua tapu te tino atua, no te mana te whenua ko koe tonu te atua, ko koe te maramatanga o te ao, i te ahora koe i rotai te tamako ihu karaiti e po toku mona wa mo te ao ko koe tonu te atua o koe te
Beautiful. Hopefully some of you have got some goosebumps. That's how it's chanted and sung. It's a beautifully crisp version, this one by the Shiloh whānau. But when you go back over the YouTube recording, this is how it's sung. The underline is where you start to put the nuance in the sound rather than the monotone. Then that's where the nuance is. It's beautiful, it's easy, and it's just practice, really. You've already got the pronunciation, I think, in our 4th session on how to say the words. Now it's just a matter of putting it into a chant. And it's one that you could learn again if you're on a marae. If you came with me on a marae and we took Taha Māori, I'll take the Taha Māori choir with me, and we would then perhaps be able to sing this waiata, this himene, this affirmation of faith. It's most appropriate to be used on a marae. Now, I'd like to continue with our journey in Land of the Long White Cloud, of course. You already know the kōrero and you already know the kaupapa. And before we introduce our very special guest this morning, let's hear from the rangatahi or youth, Zeb Schrader and Enzai August. Let's hear from them. Titiro whakarongo mai.
There are all these things that, as like a middle-class, very comfortable white person, tell me that everything's okay. You know, Jacinda's Prime Minister, it's all good. But the first time you encounter some of the histories of this land, it's like, far out, that happened here. Whether that history is something awful like colonization, it's like, whatever, you have to confront that.
So all you really need is your paste, your brush, posters, and another human. We are going to make some wheat paste, sticky goodness for putting up posters. We met in high school very early on, and we've been best friends ever since. So we've got Protect Ihu Mātao, our rare heritage landscape from destruction. It looks nicer when it's in colour, but that costs lots of money, so we just do it in black and white.
Postering is a form of consciousness raising. We wanted to be out there amongst the community, not sitting inside posting about it.
Ihu Mātao is a place up in Tamaki Makaurau, not far from the airport. Way back, 1863, I believe. The land there was confiscated from mana whenua by the colonial government. So what's happening now is there's about to be a semi-large scale housing development built on their whenua. And the people of Ihu Mātao have been resisting this development for the past 4 or 5 years.
Poneke Solidarity Alliance Ihu Mātao is a group that
was started to stand in solidarity and support the whānau up at Ihu Mātao. We put up a lot of posters around Wellington, just trying to figure out how we can reach people.
I'd kind of been dealing with this question of like, you know, if you'd been around, you know, during the Springbok tour or during the Land March, what would you have done? And so to me, it really kind of presented itself as that moment.
It seems like the right thing to do, and we're all committed to trying to do something practical. In my opinion, these things need to be led by tangata whenua.
but it does require participation from outside of that sphere as well.
So we've been largely under the guidance of the people from Ihu Mātao. So if they have things that need doing or they're planning some kind of upcoming action, we'll take guidance from them. We had a little stall at the Newtown Fair. One of the big things we did was a petition was started to try and get the government to intervene in some shape or form. It ended up getting over 20,000 signatures, and it culminated in the petition delivery, which was a big march to Parliament. All the whānau came down in a big bus, and it was real cool.
Let's do this!
Heaps of people came along, and we all We all marched. That was like just a really cool experience.
My comrades, our whānau, and this historic hikoi, calling for justice at Ihumātao. Te whanganui Tara, you have turned it on today.
You want to chuck your corn flour in there first and then add the water. 1 to 4 is a good ratio. It really starts to thicken once it gets mixed in. And you just got to keep stirring it.
There was quite an interesting moment in my sociology lecture last trimester where we were talking about colonisation, the sociology of colonisation. And the lecturer spent 15 minutes talking about how bad he felt about colonisation. And I think, to me, that was very telling about, I guess, the power of white guilt. You know, we as human beings did awful things to other human beings, so of course we feel bad, and it's like, actually, we need to be having a productive conversation about this instead of just talking about your feelings.
The personal sort of process of working through all this stuff is really important, but at the end of the day, you know, how's that going to affect what you do and how you operate in society, you know?
I think it would be wrong to say that, at least for me, like, I've made it through the white guilt.
Oh, of course not. I think that goes without saying.
Gosh. It shouldn't be something that kind of hinders you from getting involved with Te Reo Māori and learning the language and talking to people. You know, this is something that you can do to really make a change.
There we go. Yeah, that's probably far too runny. At the end of the day, if you end up with some kind of sticky liquid, then it's probably good enough. If it slides off, then you know it's totally wrong. Let's go. Let's do it. You can go on brush, I'll go on posters.
Over the past couple of months, things have gotten more tense at Ihumātao.
In late July, an eviction notice was served to mana whenua, and they've since been peacefully protecting their land.
Our solidarity work has been taking this message to the steps of Parliament and demanding that the Prime Minister take responsibility.
Even if you're far away, there's heaps of stuff that you can do, like printing out a bunch of posters, going sticking them up, talking to your friends and whānau, and bringing these issues into the public consciousness. And that's something that anyone can do, I think.
A gifted writer and theatre maker, Jo Randerson is the founder and artistic director of Barbarian Productions and is based in Pōneke in Wellington. Jo has received the Robert Burns Fellowship, Arts Foundation New Generation Award, and the Bruce Mason Award for Playwriting, just to name a few. She is the author of several books of poetry, play texts, and short stories. Jo is one of the most talented writers and performers in contemporary New Zealand theatre, and her plays have been performed around the motu and overseas. Equally, her short stories have appeared widely in magazines and anthologies. Hannah McIntosh said this of you, Jo. Jo and the crew behind Barbarian Productions know how to engage people in a way that is rare. For Jo, engaging in the world of theatre is the medium through which she can most exuberantly engage people in conversations, kōrero, around the issues that she sees impacting the world. Mōrena Jo, nau mai whakatau mai, and thank you for joining us today.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you. We are all pununga, or pununga or servants of the Auckland Anglican Diocese here in Taha, Māori, and we're keen to learn a little bit more, obviously. So, Jo, many of us have found the Land of the Long White Cloud series to be really compelling, confronting, and in some instances, a tad uncomfortable. What prompted you to do this series?
Kia ora. I just introduce myself a bit more too. Just Cynthia, te hei Māori ora, ka tuku mihi au ki te maunga whau, ka tuku mihi au ki te moana te whanganui ātara, I tipu ake au I te mana whenua o Ngāti Toa me te Aotearoa. I acknowledge the mana whenua where I am here in Pōneke. No tamaki makaurau ahau. I was born in Auckland and lived there with my parents, Richard and Jackie. Ko Pōneke toku kāinga noho nai, and I live here now. Ko Randerson toku whānau he Pākehā ahau. Ko Barbarian Productions toku rōpū. This is my theatre group, as you acknowledged, Cynthia, kia ora. And I am coming to you from Vogelmorn Bowling Club, which I think of as my tūranga waiwai. It's an old bowling club that we now use to make our theatre and community work. So kia ora, ko Jo Randerson toko ingoa. I'm very happy to be part of this kōrero, and just Cynthia, kei te mihi, I really acknowledge your work and all of the crew with you who are driving Taha Māori. I was so excited to get your email about what you're doing, and yeah, tēnā tātou katoa, everyone here on the Zoom. I listened to one of your kōrero from maybe last week or when you had your hui, and it was very exciting and yeah, heartwarming to hear. So thank you so much for having me here. Now I can maybe answer your question. Just Cynthia, would you mind just repeating the pātai?
Sure. We've been watching the series, Land of the Long White Cloud, of course. And what we do is we normally we go into breakout rooms into smaller groups, and they pull upon an insight or something that sort of poked at them, and then they come back into the plenary after about 10 or 15 minutes, and then they share the insights of that rōpū. So we found it, quite compelling and confronting, and in some instances rather uncomfortable. So the question was, what prompted you to do the series?
Thank you. Yes, well, I would like to acknowledge Kathleen Winter, who is the wahine who drove the project and actually made the whole series and directed the whole series. And by chance, I saw Kathleen last night and said that we were having this hui this morning, and she was very happy to hear that people were watching the work and having reactions to it. So I bring greetings from her. I think Kathleen is an incredible activist and a filmmaker, and uses her talents there to put these kōrero and challenges or wero out there. She approached us because we had made our piece, Cook Thinks Again, which is this walking tour, and what prompted us to make that was we felt as we were approaching the Cook commemorations that it was probable that the government would be telling they would be trying to do a balanced story, but we suspected from what we had seen in the past it would probably be more of a heroizing narrative towards Cook, and we really wanted to, as Pākehā, put a alternative story out there which really clearly placed James Cook and his voyage as an invasion, which is what we believe it was and many other people believe it was. I know that is a confronting word for some people, and one of the interesting things about making work, I think, in Aotearoa now is that there is such a spectrum of who you might be talking to. And when we made our work, on one hand, we had some people saying, how dare you destroy the legacy of Cook, and on the other hand, people saying you are not going far enough and you need to go way further, and the kōrero is way beyond this. So I always find that as a challenge as a maker, if you're wanting to be inclusive and meet everyone, but also knowing, come on people, we need to be moving fast in this decolonisation journey. And I think that's a hard place to be in, and I really acknowledge that yeah, it is confronting, and it brings up a lot of emotions for us. As we made the work, it brought up a lot of stuff for us, and that was great, because change is great. Change, it's challenging. Like I always remind myself, change isn't easy. You're not like, oh great, that challenge was just pitched at the right place for me and I just absorbed it and moved on. Like part of the signals that we are changing, that it is uncomfortable. So just acknowledging that it takes us time and space, but like that young activist Zeb was saying, or Enzai was saying, we can't take up too much space and time processing our own emotions and reactions. I think those are conversations we should have as Pākehā between ourselves. Quite, you know, God, I found that hard. Like, yes, process, but we can't take up space inside these precious times of kōrero when we need to be moving towards action. So that's my first. Cynthia, I can talk quite a lot, so I better stop now.
No, please do, please do. One of the things that Hannah used, you know, when she did her interview with you, that resonates, I think, really is about, you know, the stuff that you do is engaging. And I think when it is uncomfortable and when it is compelling, it's engaging, isn't it? And it's, but she also used a word called exuberant. And I think when you're talking about, you know, what are those next steps? What's the next action? You know, that's where that exuberance sort of escalates, as it were. And how do we make an impact? I guess, how do we make that impact? So it sounds to me like you were hoping to do all of those things, to engage and impact. And so some of those responses you have received already, some saying you went too far and some saying you didn't go far enough. Were there many responses, and what might they have been?
Were there many responses to the work that we made?
Yeah,
and what were they?
To the message, to the message that went out there. Was there a mixed bag, as it were?
Yeah, I think there is that phenomenon where, especially when you put something out on the internet, and sometimes people talk about it without actually seeing it and come in with a lot of opinions, but they haven't actually engaged with what the work is. There was definitely pushback. We don't really feel too concerned about any pushback about. Well, we actually had one of James Cook's ancestors. Like great grandchildren way down the line. Sorry, my tired brain is not finding the right words. But one James Cook was her ancestor, and she came on our tour, and she talked about her journey as someone who started feeling that he was a great man, and then learnt more perspectives on the story, and then found a place to be comfortable with that. And she was really happy with the work that we had made. We had what we aim for, and when you talk about that word of exuberance, we do use a lot of comedy, and we try to bring a deliberate lightness of energy, because it's pretty heavy, and it's really it's not easy work that we're going on, and so we want to consciously bring joy and lightness. And I feel really grateful, I think, coming from the church as you have this kōrero, it puts you in a great place, because you have prayer and you have waiata and you have these things around you that can help soften into dealing with territory that we know is hard. And I think, whereas, say, a lot of the social media conversations, there aren't those softeners and spiritual, so it just can become a word battle, and it can get quite heated, and then people get scared and confused and shut down. So we deliberately try to calm ourselves down, slow ourselves down, so we can be strong enough to hear the challenges that come and respond and get over our own defensiveness. You know, when we're defensive, why? Are we embarrassed? Are we full of shame? Are we whakamā? You know, so try to understand why. That's one thing I'm always going, why an angry pushback from Pākehā? Why do we, because if we could let go of that and just softly receive the challenge and make action, like Enzai and Seb are saying, just turn, you know, learn Te Reo, listen in these conversations. Yeah, so that's sort of a lifelong question for me, is why we as humans tend to get defensive and reactive and angry rather than try to stay open. But I do all those things myself, so I'm asking myself that that question, and it's hard going, but great that we're going here. And yeah, just something again, I'm so proud of all this work. It's so exciting.
For sure. I think Andrew Judd in particular, you know, is somebody that sort of, you know, that really hit hard, not just to us as an audience, but to himself. He really had to, that change that you talk about, he transformed himself and is still an advocate for, you know, the Māori seats in local government. And of course, you know, we've had the first reading already, so yay. And he's been, you know, a big driver for that as well. So I worked in local government for a long time too, and we weren't successful in the far north either. So it's a good move. Any Māori responses?
Yeah, we worked as we created it. We obviously wanted to make sure one of our collaborators, Boni Te Rongopai Tukiwaho, who is based in Tamaki Makaurau, who was a really key advisor for us. He said, "You are telling a Māori story, but it is for Pākehā," and I found that framing really helpful, because we felt we can't rely on Māori to do all the work and do the heavy lifting, like people say. We have to find a way to come in as allies, and not everyone likes that word allies, but a way that as Pākehā we can be strong, clear, generous, but also, like I think Enzai and Seb were saying, be led by tangata whenua, and that learning how to be in this position. Jen Margaret, who is in Land of the Long White Cloud, she's the woman with curly hair, she wrote a beautiful book about, and she interviewed people from this country, people from Australia, how to be a good ally. And I think yeah, learning how to get through that guilt, that Pākehā paralysis, and come in and be at an activist conference I was at last year. Someone said, "Oh, you Pākehā, you're also, oh no," oh, she's like, "That's not very fun. That doesn't make me want to join in a collaboration with you." So yeah, how do you bring, hey, I'm here, I'm ready to work, I'm ready to be useful, but I'm not gonna, I'm learning how to be like in service of the kaupapa. So anyway, Boni was really helpful, I think, in helping us find a place that we could sit strongly as Pākehā, and be able to do the work that was ours, talk about what was our work as Pākehā, but not kind of culturally appropriate stories that weren't ours. And that's another balance line, you know, all the way through the work we have these little points of, are we going to, does this become, we're telling someone else's story, trying to make sure we're working on it, but that we're strongly guided by Māori as our collaborators. And Jen Margaret is someone who teaches around Te Tiriti, around the treaty. She was a really core person of guidance for us too, and going, yeah, how do you stay strong and not overstep a mark? So it's not easy, but for us, having Māori collaborators in there with us, guiding us, is crucial. Right.
I think one of the key things too is it's Pākehā telling Pākehā, and then so that way nobody's offended, nobody feels that they have to defend themselves to any great degree. I guess that was my first initial thought when I started to watch the series. Oh, Okay, wow. And Māori not having to be out there and saying, you know, you guys shouldn't have done this, and you know, in that really sort of radical way, which then scares people off. So when I talk about Māori response, I also talk about our responsibility to also travel on that journey alongside and advise and be a part of the conversation as well. So I admire you for the work. I admire Kathleen for her insight that this could be a tool that could speak into. Taha Māori is set up in the same way. It's a Māori woman, myself, I guess, and enabling and encouraging and building up confidence, just as the Land of the Long White Clouds series is as well. Yeah, no, thank you for those insights. What normally happens now, if you don't mind, Jo, we do go into breakout rooms and we corridor groups for about 10, 15 minutes. And then they return with a spokesperson, and then they'll reveal this insight that I talked about earlier about this week's film that they've just seen and what you've just shared with us now. So if you had the time, we'd love for you to stay on, and perhaps, you know, you might want to visit a couple of rooms. You've got permission to go and visit if you want to. That's entirely up to you. And although we acknowledge that 15 minutes is not long enough, you'll automatically go into a room. You'll just get pushed into a room automatically, and then you can just come out of the room whenever you're ready. And so you can be a room hopper, a room hopper, marae hopper, and if you wish, or hang out here with Megan and I, and until they return in about 10, 15 minutes. So will you stay?
Aye, yes, please.
Lovely. Okay, thank you. Nō reira e te whānau, you've seen the film, you've heard some of the kōrero. Haere tonu koutou. No mai hoki mai. Welcome back. I know we've robbed so many minutes from you. I know we need more time to speak about such crunchy subjects. I get that. We'll have to do one whole session on this, you know, to unpack it eventually further down the track. But thank you for our facilitators. May I please start with Liam, who was in group 1, I believe. Liam. If he hasn't been booted off, I can't see him. All right, well, he might have just lost some internet contact. How about Julian in group 2? Are you prepared to? Yep, thank you, Julian.
Yes, of course, please correct me, group, if I missed something. We had a group member speak very well about honesty and the importance in the narrative and the teaching of this issue in schools, that teachers don't duck the issues of injustice. And then another person in our group spoke that Māori must lead the narrative, not Pākehā. And then there was a bit of discussion around if Pākehā are teaching Pākehā, then Māori would be our advisors, because there is that whole strategy of Pākehā helping Pākehā to decolonize, so as to be less confronting. So those two issues of honesty, trying not to duck the issue. Oh, and there was a lot of speech about the Springbok tour. People didn't think that they knew as much about the issues back then as we know about the issues, as the youth in this film know about the issues today. There was a kind of an affirmation that our youth are more in touch with the deeper issue today. One member spoke that, and several members agreed. That's it, I think.
Thank you, Julian. So yeah, you know, these young people, woohoo! We've got to build them up, build them up. Yeah, they're our future leaders. Thank you so much, Group 1, for your contribution. I understand you, Nikki, might be able to help us with group 1's feedback?
Yeah, okay, so I'll do that. So we had a range of contributions from our group around the issue of Pākehā speaking to Pākehā without cultural appropriation and that tension, around the issues for immigrants who sometimes feel they're not quite yet Pākehā or get reactions from Pākehā who have been born here. So sort of who do you think you are to be speaking into the situation? You know, you're not one of us, you haven't been born here. So some of those kind of issues. The other thing that we talked a little about was the Karakia Church and how that has been up till now and how it is now with us hardly worshipping together, and whether it's time to re-look at the Karakia Church and how that is in practice for us. And there was a little bit of a discussion about the blessing of oil service and you know, there weren't that many people there, but you know, how it was at the Marae Church, and you know, that was so there was some of the discussion as well.
Thank you, Nikki. And group 1, yeah, no, good feedback, great feedback. Lots of stuff for us to go away and think about and have conversations with our colleagues really about that. Okay, we've got Diana for group 3, please. Thank you, Diana.
Well, we had a very interesting discussion. It was good to have Jo along there with us. It was interesting to note that where we were coming from had an influence on what we thought about Captain James Cook and the teaching we'd had beforehand in our schools, and the fact that some of us are probably connected in our local area. I live in South Auckland, been on the Papakura Marae. We need all these things to open up to us, and we need to reach out more than we've done in the past. And the other thing, which didn't really come out, was that we've intermarried and many of our families are mixed. That possibly did not appeal to, it did not apply to everybody, but that's what I've noted. And I think that discussions like this, opportunities like this, we would all acknowledge in our group that it was very worthwhile, and that we need to look to what the schools are teaching, because our children are so important and the future depends on what they learn.
Yes, thank you, Diana. Very important insights that you've offered back, and very much, lots of thanks to group 3. When you talk about intermarriage, I just want to quickly just share this one little story with you. Whina Cooper, who you will all know, when she was at the time campaigning for change regarding whenua, not 1 acre more, in one of her speeches at Te Unga Waka Marae in Epsom, she stood up and, you know, they were all sort of building up and escalating, and they're, not 1 acre more. And she says, there's only one way to beat the Pākehā, and that's to marry them. Because they were, boo, 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 boo. She went, no. And you have their kids. That's what you do. You have their kids. And guess what? Their kids will all be Māori. Just share that very quick story with you. Thanks very much. Okay, and our last group, please, Vicky.
Would anyone like to help me with it?
Okay.
What might be outside and it Philip. Okay, Philip.
Philip?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Cool.
Thanks, Vicky.
I'm sorry I didn't take notes, so I hope some of my group will hop in if I miss out on the points they were trying to make. I took a lot of interest, and I didn't record their names either, I'm sorry. A lot of interest. One lady talked about us going around the mulberry bush, and it sounds like we're going round and round and round. And she said, hopefully it's a spiral this time, and that we're heading to a definite point. Another person spoke about how proud he was of the two youngsters in their peaceful way of protesting and bringing some facts to our attention. From my point of view, I'm an English immigrant, and Cook was always held up there as, one of our heroes. And learning English history, he was held up there with esteem like Nelson and Wellington and those traditional English heroes that we had. And all of a sudden you find out he's the villain of the piece. He's an invader. And I mentioned, well, my dad fought against an invader in the 1940s. How would we feel going back then? And it would probably be remarkably similar. What else was there? There was something else that I really want to try and remember. One of our ladies was married to a Maori gentleman, and she mentioned that her children are Māori. And it follows on beautifully from what Dame Finney Cooper said, and they identify with that side of their heritage. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Philip, and thank you for filling in and assisting Vicky to deliver that insight. And thank you very much to Group 4. Very insightful. Thank you. Yes, we continue to be challenged, of course, about this subject that's been brought up in Land of the Long White Cloud. I just want to go back to Jo, if I may. Jo, how might the church best support change? Do you have any can you offer us anything?
Particularly around this kōrero and decolonisation and honouring Māori as tangata whenua. I think that connecting with other people beyond our groups and our parishes is so important, and that's something that I grew up in the church, and my father was a very strong believer and speaker about just getting